Have you ever looked into the eyes of someone who is truly crazy? Not someone who just does off-the-wall things or acts different, but genuinely insane. I have, and it terrified me. Let me back up. I will be vague on many details for obvious reasons, but a backstory is absolutely necessary. I work for a large corporation. I actually have a couple of different bosses, but the one I formed a genuine friendship with is the one we will call Jeff. Jeff is a very laid-back, go-with-the-flow type of guy with a great sense of humor. I also should explain that he is single with no children. Not long after I started working with the company, we became friends and he often stops by my desk to chat. It was about a year ago that he stopped by one morning, and I immediately knew he was not himself. He seemed distant and stressed, which is unusual for him. When I questioned what was wrong, he told me he needed to speak with me about a situation. Of course, I was immediately concerned and urged him to go on. He explained that a few years ago, long before I started at the company, another woman began working at the company. She was not in our department but did work within our company that required her to interact with leadership in our area, including Jeff. From this point on, we will call her Lauren. He explained his interactions with Lauren were not often, but she was polite and professional when they did need to speak. He said she worked for the company for less than a year and then left as she announced she was getting married and moving. That was that. He did not encounter her again until a couple of weeks prior when he received a friend request from her on social media. He explained he didn't think much of it and accepted it as he was Facebook friends with many colleagues, both past and present. She then messaged him later on after accepting the request. He said he chatted back with her initially as she seemed to just want to catch up. He learned she had divorced and wanted to move back to our town. The conversation carried on normal until she asked if he would join her for dinner when she came back to town to visit in a couple of days. Jeff explained he politely declined her offer, and, at first, she took it well. Then it all went downhill from there. He stopped responding shortly after declining the dinner invitation, and within a few hours he received erratic and insulting messages from her. Everything from calling him a wimpy bitch to saying she was the best thing he could hope for, and he blew any chance with her. He let me read some of these messages myself right then. He honestly felt they were drunk texts but still bothered him, and he blocked her. He figured that was the end of it. How very wrong he was. She then began emailing both his personal and work email, pleading for another chance, saying she was drunk and didn't mean it, saying she needed to see him, and so on. I would get to read a lot of these myself when I would later be asked to print these off for him for evidence. The reason he was telling me about this that particular day was because he had received a message request from Lauren's sister saying she needed to talk to him about Lauren and it was urgent. He accepted and responded to who we will call Beth. Beth told him something had snapped in Lauren when she went through her divorce, and she became fixated on a man she called Jeff. Beth explained she had tried to talk some sense into Lauren when everything fizzled out with the initial conversation with Jeff, but Lauren wasn't having it. Lauren told Beth he was her soulmate, and she was going after him. All this led to Beth explaining Lauren had flown into our town and was staying at a hotel close to our company and was coming to see him at work. Jeff said he found out what Beth said to be true when he came in and found Lauren standing outside of his office. She immediately ran to him when she saw him and pulled him into an awkward hug. Jeff said he smelled alcohol on her and he immediately pulled away. She explained she was here to get her old job back and needed to see him. She also brought him gifts that included gift cards, snacks, and a picture of herself. Jeff refused these gifts, but she became more forceful and insisted he keep them. Jeff got away from her shortly after saying he had a meeting. He went to HR to explain the situation and how he absolutely did not want her being employed there again. He provided me with a copy of the picture she left for him and said if I saw her anywhere around company property to notify security. Beth later sent Jeff a picture of Lauren dressed as a man that Lauren had sent to her saying, "I'm wearing a disguise so I can watch him without him knowing it's me." Again, this was nearly a year ago. Things only escalated. Lauren made multiple trips back to our town but would try to catch Jeff in the parking lot. He would find multiple letters on his vehicle from her. Sometimes they made no sense. She once left him 2 letters that said the exact same things word for word, but one was in cursive and one was in print. Jeff blocked numerous email accounts only for her to make new ones. She professed her love for him, begged him to want her, stated she made him her beneficiary if anything was to happen to her. She even sent emails that were clearly from her but claimed to be other men that wanted her and needed him to release her so that she could love them instead. Again, I got to read all of this when printing evidence. She eventually got his personal cell phone number somehow and began calling and texting him constantly. He'd block the numbers only for new ones to come through. This eventually ended up in court, and a protective order was granted. This did bring things to a halt for a while. Jeff was finally himself once this occurred, as he had become a shell of himself. I felt horrible for him. That was until this week. On Monday morning, Jeff came by my desk and I could tell right away he was not happy. Before I could say a word, he demanded to know who placed all those letters on his desk. I was confused as I had no clue what he was talking about. I said as much and he explained there was a thick stack of letters and handmade Valentine's cards on his desk from Lauren. We later found out they had been stuffed under his door and the housekeeper found them scattered on his office floor when she went in to clean. She didn't know what they were and picked them up and neatly placed them on his desk. This was as troubling as it was figuring out how she got in the building in the first place. Shortly after, Jeff returned to his office to finish up some things before taking the letters to the police station. I was working away at my desk when I received a call from Jeff. Upon answering, I heard an almost panicked Jeff saying, "She's here." He explained he got a knock at his office door and opened it to find her on the other side grinning at him. He said he told her he was calling the police and slammed the door in her face and locked it. He called police and then called me to inform me she had been there and the police were on the way. I, foolishly, assumed she'd bailed after he told her he was calling the cops. I got up from my desk and headed down the hall to Jeff's office to check on him and wait on the police with him. I stopped dead in my tracks when I saw her. She was sitting on the floor outside his office door, humming to herself. She slowly turned her head to look at me. I can't explain the knot that formed in my stomach as our eyes locked. She looked a lot like the picture Jeff had previously given me, but her eyes were different. They were dark. There wasn't that lively spark that you often see in people's eyes. It was like they were hollow, void of any normalcy. Her lips slightly twitched up to a smile. She then slowly turned her head back towards Jeff's door, and she resumed humming. I booked it. I absolutely darted back to my desk. Thankfully, the police arrived shortly after. She didn't put up a fight. She calmly allowed them to arrest her and walked away willingly with them. Still humming, they informed us after. She is still in jail for violating the protective order. Jeff and myself are both still very shaken by the experience. I will never forget that look or her eyes, staring into an abyss of true insanity. Living in Millbrook was like growing up in a fairy tale. At least that's what I thought when I was 10. Our little town had these beautiful old buildings with fancy decorations, friendly neighbors who always waved hello, and the most amazing sunset you would ever see, though we never got to watch it fully because of the town's special rule. Everyone had to be inside by 6 p.m. sharp, no exceptions. Back then I didn't think much of it. It was just another quirky thing about our town, like how the ice cream shop only served vanilla, or how we didn't have any streetlights. My parents made it feel fun, calling it our daily cozy time, when we'd all gather in the living room, pull the heavy curtains shut, and play board games or tell stories until bedtime. I remember how Mom would check her watch at 5:45 every evening and call out, 15 minutes, in this cheerful sing-song voice, and Dad would start warming up hot chocolate, making it seem like the most natural thing in the world for an entire town to shut down before sunset. The first time I noticed something wasn't quite right was during a sleepover at my best friend Emma's house when we were 12. We were playing with her new telescope, trying to spot constellations through her bedroom window, when I saw something move in the darkness outside. It wasn't like a cat or a bird. It was bigger, and it moved in this strange, jerky way that made my stomach feel weird. Emma didn't see it, but she must have noticed how pale I'd gotten because she quickly pulled the curtains shut and suggested we watch a movie instead. That night, I heard weird scratching sounds coming from their roof, like something with really long nails was walking around up there. I tried to convince myself it was just tree branches in the wind, but deep down, I knew there weren't any trees tall enough to reach the second floor. The next morning, Emma's mom found deep scratches in their chimney, and when I mentioned what I'd heard, she got this scared look and quickly changed the subject. Things started getting stranger after that. I began noticing how the adults in town would get really tense as evening approached, checking their watches more frequently and hurrying to finish whatever they were doing. Once, I saw Mrs. Peterson, our elderly neighbor, practically running home at 5:50 p.m., which was weird because she usually needed a cane to walk. The local police started doing these weird safety checks every evening, going door to door to make sure everyone was inside. They said it was just a new community service, but their hands would shake when they checked off names on their clipboards, and they never looked up at the sky. I started paying more attention to the town's history too, trying to figure out when this 6 p.m. rule started. But every time I asked about it at the librarian would just smile nervously and hand me books about other topics, like she was trying to distract me from asking more questions. The truth came out one evening when our power went out at 5:55 p.m. Dad was trying to fix the fuse box in our basement, and Mom was upstairs looking for candles. I was alone in the living room when I heard this weird humming sound coming from outside, like a really deep, vibrating note that made my teeth hurt. Against everything I'd been taught, I peeked through a gap in the curtains, and what I saw made my blood freeze. The sky wasn't just getting dark, it was moving, like thick, black liquid rolling across the clouds. And in that darkness I saw them, huge, shadowy shapes with impossibly long limbs, gliding through the air like swimmers in black water. They were everywhere, dozens of them, their bodies seeming to absorb what little light was left. One of them turned its head, at least I think it was its head, and even though I couldn't see any eyes, I knew it saw me. I dropped to the floor just as Mom came running down the stairs, yelling at me to get away from the window. That night changed everything. Mom and Dad finally told me the truth. Generations ago, our town made a deal with these beings. They would protect us from disease, natural disasters, and other threats. But in exchange, we had to give them complete control of our town after 6 p.m. Anyone caught outside after dark would be taken. That's why there were so many missing persons cases in nearby towns, but never in Millbrook. The scratches on Emma's chimney? Those beings do regular checks, making sure everyone's really inside. The police aren't doing safety checks. They're counting heads to make sure everyone's accounted for, so the beings don't get angry and break the deal. I wanted to tell someone, to expose this horrible secret, but then Dad showed me pictures from the town's history. No major crimes, no natural disasters, no serious illnesses. We were living in a bubble of perfect safety, paid for with our freedom after dark. Sometimes at night I still hear them moving around outside and I wonder, are we really being protected, or are we just being kept like pets in a cage? Now I'm grown up with kids of my own, still living in Millbrook, still following the 6 p.m. rule. Sometimes my children ask why we can't stay out to watch the sunset like their cousins from the city do, and I tell them the same story about cozy time that my parents told me. But late at night, when I hear those familiar scratching sounds on our roof, I lie awake wondering if I'm doing the right thing by keeping this secret. The beings are still out there, still watching, still protecting, or controlling us. Last week, a new family moved in down the street, and I watched them laugh when they heard about the 6 p.m. rule. They'll learn soon enough, just like I did. Because in Millbrook, the darkness isn't just the absence of light. It's alive, it's hungry, and it's always watching. And sometimes, on very quiet nights, I swear I can hear it whispering my name, reminding me that our safety comes at a price that we're all still paying, one sunset at a time. I used to love working the night shift at Walker's Gas and Go. The quiet hours between 2 and 5 a.m. were peaceful. Just me and the gentle hum of the refrigerators keeping me company, while I restocked shelves and counted inventory. Sometimes truckers would stop by for coffee, and we would chat about the roads and weather, their stories making the time pass faster. The pay was better at night too, and being alone meant I could listen to my podcasts without Larry, the day shift manager, and complaining about my weird ghost stories. The station sat just off Highway 43, surrounded by cornfields that stretched forever into the darkness. On clear nights, you could see the lights of Millbrook City twinkling in the distance, like stars that had fallen to earth. Back then, I didn't know about Sarah Jenkins or the accident that happened in 1997. I didn't know why the old-timers avoided stopping here after midnight, or why the previous night clerk had quit so suddenly. Maybe if I had known, things would have been different. But then again, some stories you have to experience to truly understand. The night everything changed started like any other. It was late October, and the harvest moon hung low and orange in the sky, making the corn stalks cast long shadows across the empty parking lot. I was halfway through my shift, organizing the candy aisle for Halloween, when the motion sensor chimed. Looking up, I expected to see another tired trucker, but instead, I saw her, a woman in a pale blue hospital gown, standing motionless by pump number 3. The security light flickered above her, and for a moment, I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me. She looked lost, confused, her bare feet dirty, and her dark hair hanging in wet strands around her face. My first thought was that she must have wandered from the psychiatric hospital about 10 miles down the road. We'd had similar incidents before, though never this late at night. I grabbed my phone and jacket, already planning to call for help. I pushed open the heavy glass door, the cold October air hitting my face like a slap. "Ma'am?" I called out, trying to keep my voice steady and calm. "Are you okay? Do you need help?" She didn't respond, didn't even turn to look at me. She just stood there, swaying slightly in the fluorescent light, her hospital gown moving in a breeze I couldn't feel. As I got closer, I noticed something odd about the way the light fell on her. It seemed to pass through her at certain angles, like she was made of smoke or morning mist. My steps slowed as warning bells started ringing in my head. Something was very wrong here. The air around her felt thick and heavy, and the temperature seemed to drop with each step I took. When I was about 10 feet away, she finally turned, and I saw her face, or rather, what was left of it. Where her features should have been, there was just a twisted mass of scar tissue, glistening wetly in the security light. That's when Mike, the mechanic from the garage next door, came running over. "Get back inside," he shouted, his voice cracking with panic. "Don't go near her." I stumbled backward, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst. The woman, the thing, began to move toward me, its movements jerky and unnatural, like a puppet on broken strings. I ran back to the store, slamming the door shut behind me. Mike followed, his face pale and sweating despite the cold. "You saw her, didn't you?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. Sarah Jenkins. The name meant nothing to me then, but the way he said it sent chills down my spine. He looked out the window, but the woman was gone, leaving nothing behind but a lingering sense of dread and the faint smell of gasoline in the air. "Sit down, kid," Mike said, pulling up a chair. "There's something you need to know about this place." Mike's story came out in a rush, like he'd been waiting years to tell someone. Back in '97, Sarah Jenkins worked the night shift, just like me. One night, a truck lost control on the highway and crashed into the pumps. Sarah ran out to help the driver, but the sparks from the crash had already ignited the spilled fuel. The explosion was so intense it lit up the sky for miles. They found Sarah's body by pump number 3, exactly where I'd seen her standing. The official report said she died instantly, but the old-timers who were there that night tell a different story. They say they heard her screaming for hours afterward, long after the flames were put out. And ever since then, she appears on certain nights, always wearing that hospital gown they found her in, always standing by pump number 3. Some say she's still trying to help that driver, trapped in her last moments of life. Others say she's warning people away from the same fate. After that night, I couldn't look at the gas station the same way. Every shadow seemed darker, every noise more ominous. I kept working there though, partly because I needed the money, but mostly because I felt like I owed it to Sarah. She died trying to help someone, and now she was trapped here, reliving that moment of compassion and tragedy over and over. Sometimes on quiet nights, I catch glimpses of her out of the corner of my eye, or hear the faint rustle of her gown. The motion sensor chimes even when no one's there, and the security light still flickers by pump number 3. But I'm not afraid anymore. Instead, I feel a deep sadness for her, and for all the stories like hers that get forgotten over time. So I keep working the night shift, keeping her company in my own way. And if you ever find yourself driving down Highway 43 late at night, and you see the lights of Walker's Gas and Go glowing in the darkness, remember Sarah Jenkins and her final act of kindness.